This video is going to go over the different modes in the TI calculators. So if I want to go to different modes, I'm just going to press the button that says mode. So the first one is normal. I'm just going to go in order here. So normal, this is just a normal calculator where I do 8 plus 8 gives me 16. Scientific mode, SCI, is that scientific notation. What this does is if I do 5 times 8, I get 4E1, because what that is that's 4 times 10 to the first power. What that means, I would have to move the decimal over 1 time. If I wanted to go back to normal, I'll just press mode and press enter on normal, and I will do 5 times 8, gives me 40. So this is scientific notation mode, this is normal mode. We have floating decimals, meaning it just gives you as many decimals as it wants. If you have 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9, because that's all that it will hold, it'll round it to the nearest value, or it'll only give you to a certain amount of decimals. Radian and degree goes back and forth with trigonometry. So if you were dealing with degrees, so sine of 30 degrees, you would want to have it in degree mode. But if you have sine of pi over 2 is when you would want to have radians, because the radians are dealing with the pi. The next section we have is function versus parametric, polar, and I believe this is sequential or sequences. Functions are our normal, which is where we would graph it, y equals mx plus b. Parametric and polar are when you get more into the pre-calculus. We can have our graphs being thick lines, dot thick, thin, or dot and thin. So we generally want it to be a thick line so we can see it. Sequential and simultaneous. I've never really used either one of these, so I'm not going to talk about them. This next one is actually really neat. This is real versus a plus bi. So real is when we take the square root of -9, they won't give you real answers because the square root of -9 is imaginary. But when we have a plus bi, this actually gives you your imaginary answers. So if I keep it on real, I'm going to press second quit. That gets out of the program. I say square root of -9 will give me no real answers. So in real mode, all calculations must result in a real number. So if I actually go back to my mode, so I press enter on quit, I go back to my mode, and I turn it into the imaginary or complex solutions. I press enter on a plus bi. This will now be complex. Again, I quit, so second mode, and I type in the square root of -9 again, I'll actually get 3i. Because in real mode, this didn't work because this was a non-real answer. Now, this is a complex mode, and this is a complex answer because it's imaginary. This should not affect anything else, so 5 times 8 is still 40. It actually does not affect anything else in the calculator, I believe, except for when you're taking the square roots of negatives. The same thing with radian and degree affects nothing besides trigonometry. Your answers being in real or complex affects nothing else. When we get re raised to the theta I, this is going to be more into the pre-calculus or upper level maths. Here is where you can have some fun with the way the graph or the calculator is set up. Full is what it is now, where you have the full screen of, you can type in numbers like this, you see everything on it. If you go to horizontal, you have the graph up here, so you can see a graph, but then you still have this second half where you can type in 5 times 8, and you get normal math. This would just be your y equals graph, so that you can see the graph on it, and then you can still use your numbers for, if you're looking at it, you can still do some math underneath it. The other one, which is your graph/table, I'm going to turn that one on. It gives you back your full screen here, but if you go to your graph key, you have the graph and your table on the right-hand side. So if I go to my y equals and I type in 5x plus 1, and I go to my graph, it'll graph it on here, but it also gives me my table, so that way I can look at some values on my table. And if I go to my table, so second table, I can actually move on my table, and it moves the cursor so I can see where it's hitting. And I can move my y values too. So if I go back to the graph part, just press graph, it goes back to the graph aspect. If I press second graph to get to the table, it lets me click on my table so I can move that up and down, which is actually really neat. I still have my regular screen for normal math, so I can still do normal math here, but then my graph, I can see my table along with my graph. So I can actually see the coordinates as I'm moving. So that's the graph table. The horizontal, again, lets you see your graph and your math at the same time. So if I have my graph and my normal math, there's my graph up there. But this has nothing, doesn't affect anything on the graph. So I think either the full or the graph table one are the best two options. The next thing we have is fraction type. The one that is on right now is the numerator then denominator, which is a normal fraction. The second one is the U then ND. That's the mixed number. So you're going to have a whole number, and then you're going to have a fraction. So you're going to have like 1 and 2/3. In upper level math classes, we generally do not use mixed numbers. We use a proper or improper fraction, so we want to keep it in the numerator over denominator. For your answers, you can put it in automatic or decimal format. That's what the DEC stands for, decimal. So automatic is if you are using decimals, it'll put it in decimal format. If you are using fractions, it'll keep it as fraction format. So it depends on how you type it in. I would prefer the auto one only because I don't want to have to keep changing my answers into fractions if I get decimal answers. So if I keep it in auto, if I use fractions, then I'll get fractions out. If I use decimals, then I'll get decimals out. So it's a little bit quicker if I want the fraction to continue using fractions. The stat diagnostics, this is so you can get your correlation coefficient in the calculator. Some of these calculators do not have this mode. This one does because it's the updated software. Right now it's off. I can turn my statistics, my diagnostics on by coming here and pressing on, or you can still go to the catalog and turn on your diagnostics. So I can turn on my diagnostics here. This is for when I do linear regression. It'll give me my correlation coefficient, my R value. I've never really seen Stat Wizard, so I'm not really sure what that is. Then we have our clock and our language, which if you want to change the language, that's up to you. The clock, every time you clear your calculator, it will clear this as well, so there's really no point in turning the clock on. So these are all the modes in the calculator. Again, the radian and degree, the only time it affects you is if you are dealing with trigonometry. Real and A plus BI only affects you if you're doing the square roots of negatives. So honestly, keeping it in A plus BI might be beneficial to you. I like the graph/table only because you automatically see your table along with it. You can keep it in full or a graph table. I do not recommend the horizontal. I continue to recommend the numerator over denominator because mixed numbers are a little bit more difficult to deal with, especially if you're trying to multiply, add, subtract, any operation. I also like to keep my answers automatic so that I can change them if I need to. And I don't normally need my stats diagnostics on, only because I generally don't look at the correlation coefficient, but you are more than welcome to keep that on. So those are all of your different modes. To get out of this screen, you would press second mode, because that's the quit button, and it goes back to the normal screen. Those are all of the modes in the calculator. And again, radian degree, doesn't matter which one you're in. Generally, it tells you what you're on up here. I'm in normal mode. My floating decimals, automatic for decimals versus fractions. I'm in the complex mode. I'm in radian mode as well. So that just means that I might have to change that for trig. This does not affect me unless I'm doing the square root of negative numbers, and it just tells me the correct answer.